You're sitting in that drive-thru. The line hasn't moved in 10 minutes, and the number glowing on that menu board stops you cold. $12 for a combo you used to buy for $4. Here's what I finally figured out after decades of doing it the expensive way. The best thing that ever came out of a McDonald's kitchen was never invented by McDonald's at all. It was borrowed from a farmhouse. And you can make it better in your own kitchen for pennies. I learned this from an 81-year-old woman on a gravel road outside Guelph, Ontario, who told me she had never once eaten fast food in her whole life. Stay with me, because near the end I'll show you the exact method that Big Chain quietly walked away from back in 1990, and why the fries were never the same afterward. This works in the kitchen you already have, whether you own your home or rent a small apartment. Now let me back up and tell you how a grown man in his late 50s got humbled by a plate of potatoes. For about 30 years, I ate the same lie 3 or 4 times a week. I told myself it was cheaper to grab something on the way home than to cook. I told myself I didn't have time. I told myself the food was basically the same as what I could make anyway. I was wrong on all 3 counts, and I can prove it to you with a receipt. Last winter, I sat down and added up what my family had spent on drive-thru meals over a single year. I nearly dropped my coffee. It came to just over $4,000. Let me say that clearly. More than $4,000 in 1 year, gone, for food that left us hungry again by 9 o'clock at night. And here's the part that stung the most. When I broke down what was actually on the plate, the raw ingredients for that entire year of fast food would have cost me under $600 if I'd made it at home. That's not a small gap. That's the price of a used car, disappearing into a paper bag every 12 months. So I started asking a different question. Not, why is the fast food getting so expensive? I already knew the answer to that. The question that changed everything was, how did people eat before any of this existed? And why did it taste so much better? That question is what led me to the gravel road outside Guelph. Her name was Eleanor, and she was the mother of a fellow I'd done some fence work with. She was born in 1943 on a farm that had no electricity until she was nearly 9 years old. When I mentioned, half joking, that nobody knows how to cook anymore, she gave me a look I won't forget. Then she said something that rearranged my whole thinking. She said, "You young ones think a hamburger came from a restaurant. A hamburger came from not wanting to waste a single scrap of the animal. And that's the first thing I want you to understand. Almost every single item on a fast food menu is a peasant food, a poverty food, a make-do food invented by people who had almost nothing and could not afford to throw anything away. The hamburger itself, we act like it's a modern invention. But grinding up the tougher, cheaper cuts of beef so nothing went to waste is centuries old. Chopped and shaped meat shows up in cookbooks going back to the 1800s. The whole point was to take the parts of the animal that a rich man wouldn't touch and turn them into something a working family could stretch across several meals. It was survival food. Somewhere along the way, somebody figured out they could sell that survival food back to us at a 2,000% markup, and we said thank you. That realization was the first crack in the wall for me. Because if the food was originally cheap and originally made at home, then the only thing I was really buying at that drive-thru window was forgetting. I was paying a premium to forget how to feed myself. But it goes deeper than the burger, and this is where I started to get a little angry. Eleanor sat me down at her kitchen table and made me a plate of fried potatoes that I have honestly not stopped thinking about since. They were crisp on the outside and soft as butter in the middle, and they tasted the way I remembered fries tasting when I was a boy in the 1970s. That deep, almost beefy, savory flavor that today's fries just don't have. I asked her what her secret was. She laughed and said, "It's not a secret, it's just what everybody threw away." And she pointed to a white ceramic crock sitting at the back of her stove. I'll come back to what was in that crock, because it's the whole finale, and once you hear it, you'll understand why your homemade fries have always tasted a little flat. First, I need you to understand why the food changed. Because the food did change, and it wasn't an accident. Here's the thing nobody told us. For the first several decades that fast food fries existed in North America, they were cooked in beef fat, real rendered beef tallow. That's where that rich, roasted, almost steakhouse flavor came from. It wasn't a seasoning, it wasn't a chemical. It was animal fat, the same fat that farm families had been frying their potatoes in for 200 years, because it was free, and it was there. Then, in 1990, under enormous public pressure over saturated fat, the big chain switched from beef tallow to vegetable oil, and the taste of the fry died overnight. To try and win people back, the flavor had to be added artificially instead. You can go read the ingredient list yourself today and find a beef flavoring added to fries that are supposedly cooked in vegetable oil. Think about how strange that is. They removed the real thing that tasted good, then paid a laboratory to fake the taste of the real thing they just removed. And here's what really got under my skin. That original, tastier method never went away because it was bad. It went away because a cheaper, more shelf-stable industrial fat was more profitable to ship and store at scale. The flavor we lost was the flavor of the old way. The exact old way Eleanor had never stopped using, because nobody ever told her farm kitchen to stop. So, while the whole country was being trained to believe that good fries could only come out of a commercial fryer the size of a bathtub, this woman had been quietly making better ones on a single burner her entire life, for about the cost of a nickel a serving. That's the moment I stopped feeling clever for grabbing food on the way home. That's the moment I realized I'd been sold a story. The story was that convenience food is a modern miracle. The truth is that it's old, cheap, simple food, stripped of the very things that made it worth eating, then sold back to us with the good parts removed and the price multiplied. The burger. You think you know. I thought I knew too, and I was making 3 mistakes that ruined mine for years. Mistake number 1 was buying the wrong meat. I was buying the leanest ground beef I could find because I thought lean meant better. For a good burger, that's exactly backward. You want ground beef with real fat in it, the kind labeled regular or medium, somewhere around 20% fat. The fat is the flavor, and the fat is the juice. Lean meat gives you a dry, gray hockey puck every single time. And here's the money part. The fattier ground beef is almost always the cheapest ground beef in the case, sometimes a full $2 a pound less than the lean. The better burger is the cheaper one. Read that twice. Mistake number 2 was handling it like bread dough. I would squish it and mash it and pack it into a tight ball, working it with my hands until it was dense as a brick. Eleanor caught me doing this and physically took the bowl away from me. When you overwork ground beef, you press all the air out, and the meat turns tough and rubbery when it cooks. You want to barely touch it. Loosely gather about 1/3 of a pound, shape it just enough to hold together, and leave it alone. Press one shallow dimple in the middle with your thumb so it doesn't puff up into a ball on the heat. That's it. Mistake number 3 was seasoning it wrong and too early. I used to mix salt right into the raw meat and let it sit. Salt pulls the moisture out and starts to cure the meat, turning the texture springy and sausage-like. Instead, you salt the outside, generously, only right before it hits the pan. A cast iron pan, screaming hot, no oil needed because the fat renders out on its own, 2 or 3 minutes aside. That crust you get, that dark brown sizzle, that's real flavor that no drive-thru has ever matched, and it cost you maybe $1.50 in beef. So that's the burger handled. And already you're eating better than the $12 combo for the price of pocket change. But a burger without the bun is only half the meal, and this is where I want to speak directly to somebody specific. Maybe you're thinking this all sounds fine for people with a big farmhouse kitchen and a whole afternoon to spare. Maybe you're in a small apartment, or a rented place, or a house you've lived in for 40 years and you're not about to renovate anything. I want you to hear me clearly. This next part is built for exactly you. You do not need a bread machine. You do not need a stand mixer. You do not need special equipment, a contractor, a permit, or a single new appliance. You need a bowl, an oven, and about 5 minutes of actual work spread across an evening. Because here's the thing that broke my brain when I finally learned it. A loaf of bread is 4 ingredients. Flour, water, salt, and a pinch of yeast. That is the entire list. Everything else on the label of a store loaf is there to make it survive 3 weeks on a shelf and a ride in a truck, not to make it taste good. The method the old-timers used, and the one that has come roaring back among people who figured this out, needs no kneading at all. You stir 3 cups of flour, a teaspoon and a half of salt, half a teaspoon of yeast, and a cup and a half of warm water together in a bowl until it's a shaggy, sticky mess. That's your 5 minutes. Then you cover it, and you walk away. You go to bed. You let time do the work that your hands used to do, 12 to 18 hours on the counter. The next day, it's bubbly and alive. You fold it over on itself a few times, let it rest while your oven and a heavy pot heat up together, then you bake it inside that covered pot so it steams itself into a proper crackly crust. What comes out is a bakery-quality loaf that would cost you $6 or $7 at a good shop. Your cost in flour and yeast is under 50 cents, and you touched it for 5 minutes. And that's the pattern you start to see everywhere once your eyes are open, and if you want to go deeper into exactly how Canadians are reclaiming all of it, I've put the whole system into a book. It's called Canadian Edge, and along with Canadian Complete and Deep Canadian, it covers everything from rendered fat to root cellars to no-knead bread, the full Old Way playbook, written specifically for the kitchen you already have. Every recipe, every method, every piece of knowledge that got quietly taken away and is now sitting in one place for you to take back. You'll find the details in the description below. But knowing the history only makes you bitter. Using it is what makes you free. So let me actually show you how to take back the plate, one item at a time, starting with the thing everybody thinks they already know how to make. The first time I pulled one of those loaves out of the oven, I actually laughed out loud in my own kitchen, because I had spent my whole adult life believing bread was hard, and it turned out bread was just patient. The difficulty was never real. The difficulty was the story I'd been told, so I'd keep buying the bag. And that's the pattern you start to see everywhere once your eyes are open. Therefore, let's talk about the drink, because this one made me feel like the biggest fool of all. I used to buy soft drinks by the case, sugary pop, the kind that comes with every combo. When I looked into what I was actually paying for, I found that the syrup that makes a large fountain drink costs the restaurant somewhere in the neighborhood of a few cents. A nickel, maybe a dime, of syrup and carbonated water, sold to me for over $2. That's one of the highest markups of anything sold in the country, higher than jewelry, higher than eyeglasses. But Eleanor didn't drink any of that. What she had, in a big glass jug in her fridge, was cold water she'd flavored herself, a few slices of cucumber, a sprig of mint from a pot on her windowsill, sometimes a splash of vinegar, and a spoon of honey, which turns out to be an old country drink called a shrub that farmers made to survive the heat of haying season. It cost her essentially nothing, it didn't rot her teeth, and after a week of it I stopped wanting the sugary stuff at all. My energy stopped crashing every afternoon. My belt got one notch looser without me even trying. So now I had the burger, the bread, and the drink, all made at home, all tasting better, all for a tiny fraction of the price. And I could feel myself getting genuinely angry about the years I'd lost. But anger isn't the point. The point is the potatoes. Because the potatoes are where the real secret lives, and I promised you I'd tell you what was in that white crock at the back of Eleanor's stove. Before I do, I need you to understand why your homemade fries have always disappointed you. Because I know they have. You've tried. You cut up potatoes, you fried them, and they came out limp or greasy or crisp for about 90 seconds before going soft. You figured you just couldn't make fries at home. That's what I figured too. The reason isn't your skill. It's that you were missing 2 pieces of knowledge that everybody used to have and almost nobody has now. The first piece is the potato itself and the water. You cannot use just any potato. You need a starchy one, a russet, the big brown baking kind. And the enemy of a crisp fry is the surface starch. So after you cut your potatoes into sticks, you soak them in a bowl of cold water for at least 30 minutes. An hour is better. The water will turn cloudy and milky. That's the starch coming out. You rinse them, and you dry them completely, bone dry, with a clean towel. That step alone is the difference between limp and crisp, and it costs you nothing but a little patience. The second piece is that a real fry is cooked twice, not once. This is the part the whole industry knew and the home cook forgot. You fry them the first time at a lower temperature, around 300 degrees, just to cook the inside soft, and they'll look pale and sad. You take them out and let them rest and cool. Then you fry them a second time at a higher heat, around 375 degrees, and that's when they turn gold and shatter crisp on the outside while staying fluffy inside. 2 dips. The old chip shops all knew it. Your kitchen forgot it. But here's the finale. Here's what was in the crock. Here's the thing I drove all the way back out to that gravel road to make sure I understood correctly. The fat. Eleanor didn't fry her potatoes in vegetable oil. She fried them in beef tallow that she rendered herself, kept in that ceramic crock by the stove, topped up and reused for months. This is the exact thing the big chains used until 1990 and then abandoned. This is the flavor that a laboratory now tries and fails to fake. And you can make it at home this weekend for free, because it starts with something you are currently throwing in the garbage. Here's how. The next time you buy beef, ask the butcher for beef fat trimmings, called suet. In most Canadian grocery stores, the butcher will give it to you for free or nearly free, because most people don't want it. You take that fat home, cut it into small pieces, and put it in a heavy pot on the lowest heat your stove has, with just a splash of water to keep it from scorching at the start. Then you wait. Over a couple of hours, it slowly melts down into a clear golden liquid. You strain out the little crispy bits, and you're left with pure, clean, rendered beef tallow. It keeps for months. A crock of it costs you almost nothing and lasts a very long time. Fry your twice-cooked, properly soaked russet potatoes in that tallow, and I promise you, you will taste the 1980s. You will taste the fry you remember from childhood, the one you've been chasing at drive-through windows for 30 years and never quite catching. Because the thing you were missing was never a secret ingredient in a factory. It was the thing the factory took out. And this is the part that ties the whole story together. Rendering fat was not some rare skill. It was one of the most basic, universal chores in every Canadian farmhouse and settler cabin for 200 years. When the Hudson's Bay Company was provisioning fur brigades across this country in the 1800s, one of the single most important foods they carried was pemmican, and the binding heart of pemmican was rendered animal fat. Fat was survival. Fat was calories that didn't spoil. Fat was how people made it through a Canadian winter. Nobody threw it away, because throwing it away could get you killed. Then, in the span of one generation, we were taught to fear it, to bin it, and to buy processed oil in a plastic bottle instead. We handed over a free, superior, traditional ingredient, and in exchange we got a worse one that we had to pay for. And the very taste we gave up got sold back to us as artificial flavoring on a fry cooked in the cheaper stuff. Now, I'm not here to tell you fat is a health food and you should eat a bucket of fries every night. That's not the point, and you're smart enough to know it. The point is that for the price of one drive-through visit a week, you were paying to forget knowledge that your own grandparents used to keep themselves alive. The point is that the good version was always the old version. The point is that modern and convenient too often just meant cheaper for them and worse for you. I want you to sit with the arithmetic one more time, because it's the thing that finally moved me from thinking about this to actually doing it. $4,000 a year, out the window, for food that made me feel worse. Under $600 a year to make better versions at home. That's a difference of roughly $3,400 every single year for the rest of my life. Over 10 years, that's $34,000. That is a real retirement, or a paid-off truck, or a cushion against every rising bill in this country, sitting inside a skill so old that a woman born in 1943 thought it was too obvious to even call a secret. And the beautiful thing, the thing that keeps me in my own kitchen now on a Saturday afternoon with music on and a loaf rising on the counter, is that none of it is hard. The burger is 3 mistakes away from perfect, And now you know the 3 mistakes. The bread is 5 minutes of stirring and a night of patience. The drink is a cucumber and some cold water. And the fries, the real ones, are a free bag of fat from the butcher, a bowl of water, and 2 trips into the pot instead of 1. I spent 30 years believing I couldn't cook. What I really couldn't do was see. I couldn't see that the whole convenient world had been built by quietly taking simple things away from ordinary people and selling them back at a markup. Once you see it in the fries, you start to see it in everything. The bread, the soup, the pickles, the garden, all of it. Knowledge that was common as dirt 3 generations ago, now packaged and priced like it's some kind of miracle only a corporation can perform. You are not helpless in this. That's the whole thing I drove home from Guelph understanding. You are 1 bowl of soaking potatoes and 1 free crock of beef fat away from eating better than the drive-thru for a fraction of the cost in the exact kitchen you already have tonight. So here's what I want you to feel, more than anything I've told you. You didn't just learn a recipe today. You took back something that was quietly lifted out of your hands while you weren't looking. That crock of tallow at the back of an old woman's stove wasn't nostalgia. It was proof that the good way never actually died. It just got waiting on a gravel road for somebody to ask the right question. You're the kind of person who always suspected the story didn't add up. You watched the prices climb and the quality drop, and something in your gut told you that you were being played. You were right. And being right feels a lot better with a plate of real fries in front of you and $3,400 a year staying in your own pocket. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer this one. Do you remember when fries tasted different? Do you remember that deeper, richer flavor from before 1990, before they switched away from the beef fat? I want you to tell me in the comments, because a lot of younger folks think I'm making it up, and I want them to hear it from you. Just type it below. Even 1 line. Tell me what you remember. And if some part of you woke up a little while listening to this, if you felt that old suspicion turn into something more like determination, then come along with the rest of us who are quietly relearning all of it. This isn't about a channel. It's about a whole crowd of Canadians deciding we're done paying a premium to forget how to take care of ourselves. Subscribe and stand with us, because next time I'm going to show you the old root cellar trick that let farm families keep a full winter's worth of potatoes, carrots, and apples fresh until spring, with no electricity and no refrigerator, in a corner of a space you already have in your own home. I found the exact method in an old Ontario agricultural bulletin, and once you see how simple it is, you'll never look at your grocery bill the same way again. I'll see you there. I hope that plate of potatoes stayed with you, because we barely scratched the surface. Inside the Northern Ways circle, I take you all the way through the farmhouse method, the deeper version of what we just started. Ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You'd belong among thousands of practical folks like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code. Cancel anytime. 1 click.